It's a strange feeling watching a giant finally start to stumble. For decades, the script for a war in the Middle East was already written. We all knew how it went. The United States and Israel would flip a switch, their air forces would darken the skies, and any regional power that dared to stand in their way would be dismantled. In a matter of weeks, it happened in Iraq, it happened in Libya, and we saw the same overwhelming pressure in Syria. It was always so one-sided, wasn't it? A superpower against nations that simply couldn't keep up with the sheer technological gap. But then, something shifted. Nobody truly believed that if a real conflict broke out, Iran might actually be the one standing tall while the combined forces of the West struggled to keep their heads above water. So what is really happening here? Why did the narrative we've been fed for so long suddenly fall apart? Well, if you look at the data and it's getting harder to find, you realize that we aren't just looking at a sudden surge in capability, we are looking at the culmination of a 20-year masterclass in military planning. Iran didn't try to outspend the Americans. They knew that was a losing game. Instead, they played a long, intelligent game of disproportionate warfare. They used their brains to neutralize the world's most expensive military. Honestly, the results we are seeing now are staggering. I've been tracking the censorship lately. It's a massive red flag. There's a company called Planet Labs that provides commercial satellite imagery, right? Well, they've just been hit with an indefinite ban on releasing photos of the region. Why now? The answer is simpler than it looks. It's not to hide things from the Iranians or the Russians. They have their own satellites. They already know what they hit. No, that ban is for us. It's to prevent the public from seeing the literal wreckage of the myth of invincibility. If the world saw the charred remains of American and Israeli bases, the entire strategic balance would shift in an afternoon. Let's think about the events of March 27th. That was a dark day for the Pentagon. Iran targeted a U.S. base inside Saudi Arabia, and the losses were, well, they were catastrophic. In a single afternoon, the U.S. lost an AWACS aircraft that's a flying radar station worth $700 million, along with that 7 KC-135. Refueling tankers were either destroyed or so badly damaged they were effectively taken out of the fight. If you just count 3 of those as total losses, the U.S. military lost $5 billion in one day. $5 billion. That matters. It's a financial hit that no budget can sustain for long. And it wasn't just a one-off event. There was that rescue mission where they supposedly went in to save a downed pilot. But was that actually the goal? Look at the equipment they used. They sent in HC-130 transport planes, Black Hawks, Little Birds, and MQ-9 Reapers. Many analysts believe the real objective was to recover enriched uranium from deep inside Iran, but they failed, and the cost of that failure was another $500 million in hardware destroyed. When you add it all up, the F-15 Strike Eagles, the antennas, the drones, you realize the US is losing the equipment war at an alarming rate. That changes the picture, doesn't it? We are seeing the loss of assets like the MQ-4C Triton drone, which costs $240 million. That is 3 times the price of an F-35 jet. But the hardware losses are only half the story. The real genius of the Iranian strategy was blinding the enemy. They realized that the eyes of the US military are its greatest strength, so they focused entirely on destroying the radar systems. They've managed to take out radars worth $3 billion, and they did it using drones that cost less than a laptop. Does this move actually make sense? To the Iranians, absolutely. When you destroy a $1 billion radar with a $2,000 drone, you aren't just winning a battle, you're breaking the economic logic of modern war. Once those radars are gone, the entire defense architecture collapses. The Iron Dome and the THAAD missile batteries are suddenly useless because they have nothing to guide them. The warning times for incoming strikes have dropped from hours to mere seconds. It's a nightmare scenario for any commander on the ground. So why now? Why is this strategy finally being unleashed? Here's the reality. Iran lured the West into a massive attrition trap. In the first 16 days of the conflict, they launched waves of old missiles and cheap drones. They wanted the US and Israel to empty their silos, and they did. They fired over 11,000 interceptor munitions, costing $26 billion. They were using $1 million missiles to shoot down flying lawnmowers. By the time Iran launched its high-tech precision weapons, the defenders were literally running out of ammunition. This is where things may escalate into a total collapse of Western defense in the region. Professor Ted Postal has pointed out that the Israeli air defense was never built for this kind of saturation. It's great at stopping individual rockets, but not mass missile strikes. In the later stages of the war, interception rates have plummeted. Some reports suggest 80 to 90% of Iranian missiles are now getting through. If 90% are hitting their targets, the shield is officially broken. This is where people misunderstand the situation. They think it's about technology, but it's really about the math of exhaustion. Iran is fighting a 21st century war, while the West is still stuck in the 20th. The Americans rely on manned jets and expensive air forces. They've moved on to a drone force and a missile force. No pilots are at risk. No billion-dollar maintenance cycles are needed. Their Shad drones cost between $20,000 and $50,000. Compare that to a US Tomahawk missile, which costs $2 million each. It's a ridiculous comparison. The Russians saw how effective this was and grabbed the tech immediately for their own use in Ukraine. And then you have the FPV drones. Those first-person view drones that kids use for racing. Hezbollah has been using them like a deadly video game. With just a VR headset and a remote, they are taking out Merkava tanks that were supposed to be the most protected in the world. Against an FPV drone, a multi-million-dollar tank is just a sitting duck. They are also using anti-tank guided missiles with advanced laser and camera guidance. It's making traditional ground movement almost impossible for the Israeli Defense Forces. That makes me wonder about the global scale of this shift. If you look at a country like India, you realize how far behind the rest of the world is. We don't have these massive drone factories. We are still importing tech, often from China, just to keep up. But Iran, they've achieved vertical integration. They make their own missiles for a midpoint cost of just $4,000. Because they are so cheap, they can build them in numbers that are simply indefensible. Who benefits from this? Well, look at their cluster munitions like the Qadir and the Khorramshahr. These things have caused absolute chaos because they are essentially indefensible. You fire one missile, but once it gets near the target, it splits into hundreds of small bomblets. Even the best air defense can't stop 100 targets at once. The result is total terror on the ground. This is why the cost of defense has become a financial suicide mission for Israel and the US. Let's look at the timing. In just 6 hours of defense, Israel spent over $1 billion to stop one Iranian wave. The Washington Post says it costs nearly $300 million every single night just to keep the interceptors flying. That is an economic black hole. The Americans are selling Patriot missiles to Arab nations for $20 million a pop, even though they only cost $5 million to make. It feels like they are looting their own allies just to keep the defense industry from collapsing, but even then, the math doesn't work. If this continues, the consequences will be serious for the US dollar. You can't spend $10 billion to defend against 400 cheap missiles and expect to stay a superpower. The THAAD system is even more of a financial trap. A single battery costs up to $1.8 billion. Meanwhile, a $2,000 drone can render it useless by hitting its radar. This is the very definition of a war of attrition. The side that survives is the one whose process is more cost-effective. Iran is fighting on its own soil with low costs, while the US is struggling with a broken supply chain thousands of miles away. That changes the picture when you consider the Iranian air defense. Everyone thought it was a joke back in 2025, but in 2026, the reality was revealed. With help from Russia and China, Iran has integrated systems like the S-400 and the HQ-9, but look at how they use them. They don't waste them on missiles. They use them to hunt jets. They realize that killing a pilot or destroying $100 million fighter jet is the ultimate victory in an economic war. The Americans keep claiming they have air superiority, but how can that be true when they are losing jets to shoulder-mounted missiles? Iran is using heat-seeking manpads that don't care about stealth technology. An F-35 might be invisible to radar, but it still has a hot engine. By using their satellite network to track the general location of the jets, the Iranians can pop up, fire a heat seeker, and disappear back into the shadows. Many jets have fallen this way, and the US has no easy answer for it. This leads to the most impressive part of their preparation, the underground cities. Iran watched the 1991 Iraq War very closely. They saw how the US used shock and awe to paralyze the Iraqi command through air power, so they decided to make the Air Force irrelevant. They spent 20 years digging. They didn't just build bunkers. They built entire cities hundreds of meters below the mountains. Some are 30 meters deep, but others are 500 meters deep. That's half a kilometer of solid rock. No bomb in the Western arsenal can touch them. These cities are in every single one of Iran's 31 provinces. They have independent power, ventilation, and even rail systems to move ballistic missiles to camouflage launch silos. When you see those videos of missiles popping out of the deserts, and you're seeing the result of decades of underground engineering, the US and Israel can bomb the mountains as much as they want, but all they are doing is hitting rocks while the missiles keep firing from the tunnels below. It's a masterstroke of defensive strategy inspired by the Soviets and North Koreans. The Western media loves to report that they've destroyed Iranian launchers, but honestly, if they were destroyed, why hasn't the rate of fire slowed down? It's clear that the Missile City plan is working exactly as intended. They are protecting their assets while forcing the enemy to waste billions on non-existent targets. They even have underground air bases for their drones and long-range weapons. The reality on the ground is that the US simply cannot stop the flow of missiles because they can't find where they are coming from until it's too late. And then there is the Strait of Hormuz, the ultimate economic lever. Iran doesn't need a massive navy with aircraft carriers to win. Their navy is built for one specific purpose: control the strait. They have ultra-fast boats, underground submarines, and naval drones. They don't need to sink every ship. They just need to hit one or two cargo vessels. Once the insurance companies decide the risk is too high, the global oil trade stops. That's how you hold the world's economy hostage without ever having to land a soldier in a foreign country. Who benefits from this? Well, look at the alliances. Russia and China are no longer just partners. They are active players in this intelligence game. Reports suggest China has been sharing data from its spy satellites to give Iran pinpoint accuracy for its strikes. Russia is doing the same, providing real-time intelligence to counter us base movements. It's a classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Russia is essentially doing to the US what the US did to them in Ukraine, providing the brains for someone else's fight. The level of precision this has given Iran is terrifying. They can now hit a specific hotel room in Dubai or a specific hangar at a US base with total confidence. This isn't the Iranian military of 30 years ago. This is a data-driven, high-tech force that knows exactly where to hit to cause the most financial and psychological damage. When you combine that intelligence with their underground resilience, you get a nation that is essentially impossible to conquer through traditional air power. The next few weeks could decide everything, but the trend is already clear. The 800 military bases that once symbolized us global power have become its greatest liability. They are just 800 stationary targets that can be destroyed in minutes. Iran has proven that these bases are defenseless against a determined, smart, and patient enemy. The myth of the greatest army in the world being untouchable is officially dead. It's not just a conflict. It's a total strategic shift in the global balance of power. So in my view, the world order as we knew it is over. The era of the single superpower has been humbled by the math of asymmetric warfare. Iran didn't just prepare for a war. They prepared for a new world. They showed that brains and patience can defeat a $1 trillion budget. If you look at the bigger picture, this is a lesson for every nation on earth. This is not just a conflict. This is a strategic shift, and that may change everything.